was on this spot where occurred the lowest moment of Peter's life. You know, he was very impetuous, and before that instant occurred, he'd said to Jesus, you know, I would lay down my life for you. And Jesus said, Peter, would you lay down your life for me? Before the cock crows, you'll deny 3 times you even know me. And a little while after that, Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, brought down the Kedron Valley, and up these steps to the house of the high priest. His interrogation was about to begin. But it was far worse than an interrogation. Over there they were beating Jesus, they'd hooded him. Somebody slapped him on the face and said, if you're such a great prophet, you should be able to see through the blindfold. Which of us hit you? And of course it was about to get far worse than that. Within hours he'd be whipped within an inch of his life, and later that day he'd be crucified. And the guards had lit a fire in the courtyard of the house, and Peter was warming himself by the fire. There was a young girl there. She was a servant of the high priest, and she'd been staring at Peter. And she said, you're one of his followers, aren't you? And Peter said, no, I'm not. I don't even know him. And then a little later, somebody else was looking at him and said, yes, you are one of them. No, man, I am not, he said. And then about an hour later, Peter had a real piece of bad luck. When Jesus had been arrested in Gethsemane, Peter had tried to defend the master with his sword and injured one of the soldiers. And now one of that man's relatives spotted him and said, yes, you were with him in the garden. And then Peter lost it. With oaths and curses and swearing, he was saying, I don't even know the man. And as he spoke, the dawn was breaking. And in the distance, Peter heard a cock crowing. Jesus turned and he looked straight at Peter. And suddenly the words of Jesus flashed back through Peter's mind. Before the cock crows, you will deny 3 times you even know me. And Peter left the courtyard and cried bitterly.
Just imagine it. When I first watched the film about Peter denying Jesus, I saw so much of myself in all that was happening to Peter as he sat by the fire that night. It is true that my denials are not as obvious as Peter's was, but they are real nevertheless. At times I have felt ashamed that I lacked the courage to say the words or do the thing that I knew was right. I've often thought about what it must have been like for Peter to have felt Jesus' eyes on him in that early morning light. A friend once shared a thought about that moment. Peter wouldn't have seen Jesus looking at him unless he had been looking at Jesus. It is almost as if, at his lowest moment, Peter reached out to the one he knew he had hurt. He loved, yet he denied. I think that Peter and I would understand each other. Reading this account in the different Gospels definitely gives a much fuller picture of what happened that night. Christianity.com had this to say about Peter's denial of our Lord Jesus. A series of steps led to Peter's denial of Christ. The first was self-confidence. Second was following at a distance, and the third step was hanging out with the wrong people. In Luke 22 verse 55, we find Peter warming himself at the fire in the courtyard of Caiaphas, the high priest, who was trying Jesus. We might call it the enemy's fires. At this point, Peter was worn down, defeated and weak. He was vulnerable, and the last place he should have been was at a fire surrounded by unbelievers. Matthew's Gospel tells us that he sat down with the servants to see the end. He was now resigned to the fate of Jesus. There was nothing he felt he could do. So he was just sitting there. Peter was with the wrong people, in the wrong place, at the wrong time, about to do the wrong thing. That is why we need to give a lot of thought as to who we spend the bulk of our time with. We may think we are influencing others, but the question is, are they not possibly influencing us? We think we're pulling them up, but the very real issue may be that they are pulling us down. That is why Psalm 1 verse 1 says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful." Notice the regression in this verse. First there's walking, it then moves on to standing, and finally there's sitting. When we fall into sin, it most often begins with a series of steps. And when we hang around with the wrong people in the wrong places, we too are going to end up doing the wrong thing. So as we move through this week, let's take note of where and with who we are spending the majority of our time. What programs are we watching and listening? And most importantly, how much time are we spending with God and His people?